The gilded nebula hung in the darkness of space like a jewel made of light and metal. And Elena Vasquez had called it home for 2 years now. She stood at the service station near the kitchen, arranging wine glasses on a silver tray while the hum of the restaurant ship vibrated softly beneath her feet. The vessel was famous across 12 star systems, a place where the powerful came to eat and drink and make deals that shaped the lives of billions. Crime lords sat 3 tables away from diplomats, and warlords shared the same air as merchant kings. And nobody killed anybody because the gilded nebula was neutral ground. That was the rule, and breaking it meant death. Elena lifted the tray and walked toward the main dining hall, her steps quiet and her face calm. She was 29 years old, born on a human colony world called New Valencia, and she had been a refugee since she was 19. Her homeworld had burned in a war between 2 alien empires who barely noticed the humans living there. And she had spent 6 years on crowded ships and dirty stations before finding work here. The job was simple: serve food, pour drinks, stay invisible. And Elena was very good at being invisible. Humans were nothing special in this galaxy, or at least that was what every other species believed. The Draconari were massive reptiles with scales like armor and fire in their blood, and they had conquered 3 star systems before the Galactic Concordat stopped them. Velith were tall and graceful with 4-fingered hands and skin that changed color with their moods, and they controlled the largest spy network in known space. The Morthians were insect-like creatures with hive minds and perfect memory, and they ran the banks that funded empires and humans. Humans were small and soft and short-lived, with no telepathy and no venom and no natural weapons of any kind. Most species hired them for cleaning and serving and other jobs that required no real skill. Elena had learned to accept this, or at least to pretend she did. She entered the main dining hall and felt the usual wave of sounds and smells wash over her. The room was enormous, with crystal chandeliers hanging from a ceiling painted to look like a nebula, and tables made of dark wood from a dozen different planets. Aliens of every shape and size filled the space, eating dishes that cost more than Elena earned in a month. And servants like her moved between them like ghosts. Nobody looked at her as she passed, and that was fine. She preferred it that way. Tonight was a special night because the Obsidian Suite was occupied. The Obsidian Suite was the most private and most expensive room on the ship, a place reserved for guests who wanted absolute secrecy. And tonight it held Lord Kel Thraxvorn. Elena had seen him arrive 2 hours ago. A Draconari male who stood 9 feet tall with scales the color of dark bronze and eyes like molten goldie, moved like a predator, slow and confident. And the other guests had stepped aside without being asked. His reputation was known across the galaxy: crime lord, warlord, killer. He controlled the smuggling routes through the Kefgarder and owned a private army of 10,000 soldiers. And people who crossed him did not live long enough to regret it. 3 lieutenants accompanied him, all Draconari, all armed with energy blades at their hips. They had entered the Obsidian Suite and closed the door, and Elena had not thought about them again until now. She was walking past the service corridor that led to the private suites when she saw him. A new server stood near the supply closet, adjusting his uniform vest with careful movements. He was Velith, tall and slender with pale blue skin, and his name tag read Soren. Elena did not recognize him, which was strange because she knew every server on this ship. She had made it her business to know, because knowing things kept you alive. She slowed her steps just slightly, not enough to draw attention, and watched him from the corner of her eye. His credentials must have been approved because he wore the official uniform and carried the official tablet, and the security checkpoint at the corridor entrance had let him through. But something was wrong. Elena could not say what it was at first, only that her instincts were screaming at her. The same instincts that had kept her alive on refugee ships full of desperate people. She set her tray down on a nearby counter and pretended to check her tablet while she studied him more closely, and then she saw that his hands Velith had 4 fingers on each hand, double-jointed and constantly moving, and their hand movements were as natural and automatic as human breathing. But Soren's hands were still. They moved only when he wanted them to move, controlled and deliberate. Like someone who had practiced looking natural but could not quite manage it, Elena felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She watched him adjust his vest again. And this time, she noticed how the fabric pulled on his left side. Heavy and stiff, she knew that shape. She had seen it before on guards and soldiers and the mercenaries who sometimes raided refugee ships. It was a weapon. Hidden beneath the fabric, probably a plasma blade small enough to conceal but deadly enough to kill. Soren finished adjusting his vest and picked up a serving tray with a bottle of wine and several glasses. He walked toward the corridor that led to the obsidian suite. His steps calm and his face pleasant. Elena watched him go and felt her heart pound in her chest. Someone was about to try to kill Lord Cal Thraxvorge. Had maybe 30 minutes to decide what to do about it, and nobody on this ship would believe a word she said. Elena stood frozen for 5 heartbeats. Watching the corridor, Soren had disappeared. Her mind raced through options like a computer processing data, and every option came back with the same answer. She was powerless. She could go to security, but the head of security was a Morthian named Dreth, who hated humans with a deep and personal disgust. He had made that clear on her first day when he told her that humans were barely more intelligent than the food they served. And he had never missed a chance to remind her, since if she walked into his office and accused a credentialed Velis server of being an assassin, Dreth would laugh in her face, or worse, he would report her for making false accusations, and she would lose her job. She could try to warn someone else, but who would listen? The other servers were busy with their own work and had no reason to trust her word over the ship's security systems. The kitchen staff would think she was crazy, and the guests would not even notice her unless she set herself on fire. She was a human waitress on a ship full of aliens who thought humans were barely worth noticing. Her word meant nothing. Elena picked up her tray again because her hands needed something to do, and she walked toward the main dining hall while her thoughts kept spinning. Soren had credentials that passed a security check, which meant someone had given him real access codes. This was not a random attack by some desperate fool. This was planned, funded, organized. Someone powerful wanted Lord Calthrax dead, and they had paid good money to make it happen. Lena thought about what she knew of assassinations from her years on refugee ships. Killers who worked alone usually had backup plans, ways to escape or ways to cause chaos if the first plan failed. If she raised an alarm now, before Soren made his move, he might panic and start shooting. The obsidian suite was reinforced, but the corridor outside was not, and there were servants moving through that area all the time. People would die. People like her who were just trying to do their jobs and stay alive. She could not let that happen. She also could not just do nothing. Elena set her tray down again and closed her eyes for a moment, thinking, what did she have? She was small and weak and unimportant, and nobody would listen to her voice. But Lord Calthrax was a predator, a creature whose species had evolved to hunt and kill. And predators paid attention to warnings if those warnings reached them directly. She just had to find a way to reach him without Soren noticing the wine service. Elena opened her eyes and felt a spark of hope in her chest. The obsidian suite had ordered a special wine for tonight, a vintage from the Kale system that cost more than she earned in a year. The sommelier had already prepared it, but the actual delivery was scheduled for 10 minutes from now. If she volunteered to deliver it, she would have a reason to enter the suite, and she would have a chance to get close to Lord Calcax. Walked to the sommelier station with quick steps, her heart still pounding. The sommelier was a Velith woman named Thresh, who had always been polite to Elena in a distant and professional way. She looked up as Elena approached, her blue skin shifting to a pale green with curiosity. "Can I help you?" "I need to take the wine service to the Obsidian Suite," Elena said. Keeping her voice calm, Thresh's skin shifted to orange with surprise. "That service is assigned to Mira," she said. "Myra is sick." Elena lied without hesitation. "She asked me to cover for her, and I already cleared it with the floor manager." Thresh studied her for a moment with eyes that saw more than most. And Elena held her breath. The lie was weak and could fall apart with a single question. But Elena was betting that Thresh would not bother to check. Human servants were interchangeable in the eyes of most aliens, and one was as good as another. After a long pause, Thresh shrugged, and her skin returned to pale blue. "Fine," she said. "The tray is ready, and the wine has been breathing for 20 minutes already. So do not delay." Elena picked up the tray with steady hands and thanked her. Then she walked toward the service corridor. Her steps measured and calm, even though her heart felt like it might burst. She had maybe 5 minutes before Soren returned with the appetizer course, and she had to work fast. She stopped at the linen station and grabbed a fresh napkin, white and perfectly folded. Then she ducked into a storage closet and pulled out the pen she always carried in her pocket. It was a cheap thing, bought at a station market years ago, but it wrote on cloth well enough. She unfolded the napkin and wrote 5 words in trade common, the universal language that every species in the galaxy understood. "Listen, fake, wait or arm, port side." Her handwriting was shaky but readable, and she folded the napkin small and tucked it beneath the larger napkin on the tray. Then she took a deep breath and walked out of the closet. The corridor to the Obsidian Suite stretched before her like a tunnel into darkness, and Elena walked down it with her head high. The VCD security checkpoint scanned her badge and let her pass without comment. The door to the suite loomed ahead, black metal with silver patterns, and Elena stopped before it and pressed the service chime. A voice came through the speaker, deep and rumbling. "Enter." Elena opened the door and stepped inside, and the fate of a crime lord rested on a folded napkin in her hands. The Obsidian Suite was darker than Elena had expected, with walls of black stone that seemed to swallow the light, and a single chandelier that cast shadows more than brightness. The table in the center was massive, built for creatures larger than humans, and 4 Draconari sat around it like statues carved from bronze, and gold. Lord Calthrax Vorn sat at the head of the table, his scales gleaming in the dim light, and his golden eyes tracked Elena the moment she stepped through the door. He was even more terrifying up close. His head was shaped like a great lizard from Earth's ancient past, with a long snout full of teeth and horns that curved back from his skull. Like a crown, his shoulders were broad enough to fill a doorway, and his claws rested on the table like knives waiting to be used. He looked at Elena the way a hawk looks at a mouse, with complete disinterest in whether the mouse lives or dies. The 3 lieutenants were smaller, but no less dangerous, their scales dark red and their eyes fixed on Elena with cold attention. One of them had a scar running down the left side of his face, a mark left by some weapon that had almost killed him. Another was female, rare among Draconari warriors, and her teeth were sharper than the others. Elena kept her eyes down and her steps quiet as she approached the table. This was the moment that would decide everything, and she could not afford to make a mistake. She had practiced serving wine 1,000 times, and her hands moved through the motions without thinking. Set down the tray, lift the bottle, present the label to the host. Lord Calthrax barely glanced at the label before giving a slight nod, and Elena poured a small amount into his glass with perfect form. He lifted the glass and swirled the wine, then brought it to his snout and inhaled. His nostrils flared and his eyes closed for a moment, and Elena used that moment to prepare. She set the bottle down and reached for the large napkin that would be placed across his lap beneath. It was the smaller napkin with her message, And she had only seconds to make this work. She unfolded the large napkin with a smooth motion and stepped to Lord Calthrax's side. Then, as she placed the napkin across his lap, she pressed the smaller napkin into his massive claw with a movement so subtle that the lieutenants could not have seen it. His claw froze over the wine glass. His golden eyes snapped open and fixed on her face. And Elena felt the weight of his gaze like a physical force for the first time in 2 years. Someone truly saw her, not a human servant, not a piece of furniture, but a persona. A person who had just done something very dangerous. Elena did not flinch. And she did not look away. She held his gaze for exactly 1 heartbeat, then lowered her eyes and stepped back with perfect servant form. "Will there be anything else, my lord?" she asked. Her voice steady. Calthrax said nothing for a long moment. His claw moved beneath the table, and she knew he was reading the napkin. She could not see his face, but she felt the energy in the room change. The lieutenants noticed something was wrong, their bodies tensing and their hands drifting toward their weapons. But Calthrax made a small gesture, and they relaxed. "No," he said, his voice deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "You may leave." Elena bowed her head and turned to go. She walked to the door with slow and measured steps. Even though every instinct screamed at her to run, she could feel his eyes on her back, burning into her like twin suns. And she did not know if she had just saved his life or ended her own. The door closed behind her, and she let out a breath. She had not realized she was holding. Her hands were shaking now, trembling so hard that she pressed them against her thighs to make them stop. She had done it. She had delivered the warning. And now the rest was up to him. Elena walked back down the corridor toward the main service area, her mind spinning with fear and hope and doubt. Had he believed her? Would he act on the warning or dismiss it as some kind of trick? She was nobody to him, less than nobody, and he had no reason to trust her word. But she had seen something in his eyes when he looked at her. Something that might have been surprise or respect or simply curiosity. Gennari were predators, and predators understood warnings. She reached the service station and picked up another tray, forcing herself to fall back into the routine of her work. The other servers moved around her without comment, and the kitchen noise filled her ears like white noise. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. 5 minutes passed. Then Elena watched the corridor to the obsidian suite while pretending to organize glasses, and her stomach twisted with every passing moment. Then she saw Soren walk toward the corridor with a tray of appetizers balanced on one hand. His movements smooth and confident. His face was pleasant and calm, the face of a professional server doing his job. But Elena knew what hid beneath his vest. She watched him pass the security checkpoint and disappear down the corridor, and she felt helpless all over again. There was nothing more she could do. The next few minutes would decide whether Lord Calthrax lived or died, and all she could do was wait. She picked up a cloth and started polishing a glass, her eyes fixed on the corridor entrance. And she counted the seconds in her head. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Then she heard a roar that shook the walls and cracked the crystal chandelier above the main dining hall. A sound so loud and so full of rage that every person in the room stopped moving. The roar of a Draconari predator who had found his prey. The roar echoed through the gilded nebula like thunder, and every guest in the main dining hall froze in place. Elena gripped the edge of the service counter with both hands, her knuckles white and her heart racing. She could hear sounds coming from the corridor to the obsidian suite, crashes and shouts and the deep snarling of Draconari voices. Then came silence, heavy and thick like a blanket over the ship. The guests began to murmur and shift in their seats, and some of them rose to leave. But the security officers were already moving to block the exits. Nobody was going anywhere until this was sorted out. Elena stayed where she was and waited, her eyes fixed on the corridor entrance. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the door to the corridor opened. Lord Calthrax Vorn stepped through, and the sight of him made Elena's blood run cold. He was covered in blood, not his own blood, she realized after a moment. But the pale blue blood of a Velithid dripped from his claws and splattered across his chest. And his golden eyes burned with a fury that made the air itself feel dangerous. Behind him came his 3 lieutenants. Dragging a limp figure between them, Soren, the false waiter, hung in their grip like a broken doll. His arms twisted at wrong angles, and his face swollen from what must have been a brutal beating. He was alive, but barely, and his pale blue skin had gone almost white with pain and fear. The guests watched in stunned silence as the Draconari marched through the main dining hall. Some of them recognized Lord Calthrax and quickly looked away, and others simply stared with open mouths. Nobody tried to interfere, and nobody asked questions. The security chief, Dreth the Morthian, came scuttling forward with his many legs clicking on the floor. His compound eyes flickered with what might have been nervousness as he approached the crime lord. "Lord Vorn," he said in his clicking voice, "what has happened here?" Calthrax stopped and looked down at the Morthian with contempt that was almost visible. "An assassin infiltrated your ship," he said, his voice cold and hard. "He passed through your security checkpoints with false credentials and walked into my private suite with a weapon under his clothes." Dreth's legs clicked faster. "A sign of distress in his species. That is impossible," he said. Your systems are worthless," Calthrax interrupted. "If not for a warning I received, I would be dead right now, and you would be explaining to the Galactic Concordat why you allowed a murder on neutral ground." He gestured to his lieutenants, and they dropped Soren at Dreth's feet like garbage. "Interrogate him," Calthrax ordered. "Find out who paid for this, and report to me within the hour." He turned to walk away, then stopped. His massive head swung slowly across the dining hall, his golden eyes scanning the crowd of servers and guests. And Elena felt her heart stop when those eyes found her. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, then he spoke, his voice carrying across the silent room. "Bring me the human waitress," he said, "the one who delivered my wine." Elena felt every pair of eyes in the room turn toward her, and she wanted to disappear into the floor, but there was nowhere to hide. And running would only make things worse. She stepped forward on legs that felt like water and walked toward the most dangerous creature she had ever met. The guests parted before her like waves around a stone, and she could feel their curiosity and confusion pressing against her skin. Why would a Draconari crime lord want to speak with a human servant? What had she done? Elena stopped 3 feet from Lord Calthrax and forced herself to meet his eyes up close. The blood on his scales was still wet, and the heat radiating from his body was like standing next to a furnace. He could kill her with one swipe of his claws, faster than she could blink, and nobody would stop him. "You saved my life," he said. And the words hung in the air like something solid. Elena swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, my lord." "How did you know?" he asked. The question was simple, but the answer was complicated. Elena thought about the 6 years she had spent on refugee ships, watching and learning and staying alive through observation alone. She thought about the countless times she had spotted danger before it arrived. The desperate man with a knife, the poisoned food at a relief station, the engine failure that the crew had not noticed. She had learned to see what others missed because seeing was the only weapon she had. "I noticed his hands," she said. Velith's hands moved constantly, but his were too still. She paused, then continued, "And I saw the shape of the weapon under his vest. On the left side near his hip. I carry my own blade on my left hip." Calthrax said, "I did not see his." "Your species sees heat and motion," Elena replied, surprising herself with her boldness. "You evolved to chase prey that runs." And his body temperature was normal, and he was moving smoothly. "So he did not trigger your instincts." She took a breath. "Humans evolved differently, my lord, and we learn to notice the details that predators miss. Because for most of our history, we were the prey. Lord Calthrax stared at her for a long moment. And something shifted in his golden eyes. It was not warmth, exactly. Because she did not think his species felt warmth in the way humans did. But it was something close to respect. "What is your name?" he asked. "Elena Vasquez, my lord." He nodded slowly, as if filing the name away in his memory. "Elena Vasquez," he repeated. "I will remember that name." Then he turned and walked toward the exit. His lieutenants falling into step behind him, Elena stood alone in the middle of the dining hall, surrounded by staring faces, and wondered what she had just started. 2 hours later, a Draconari lieutenant came to find Elena in the servant quarters. She had been sitting on her bunk, staring at the wall and waiting for something to happen, because she knew that something would. People who got involved in the business of crime lords did not simply go back to their normal lives. The lieutenant was the female with the sharp teeth, and she looked at Elena with an expression that was impossible to read. "Lord Vorn wishes to speak with you," she said. "Come with me." Elena stood and followed without asking questions. They walked through corridors she had never seen before, past security checkpoints that required codes and scans, until they reached a door marked with the Draconari symbol for private quarters. The lieutenant pressed her claw to a panel, and the door slid open. "Go inside," she said. "He is waiting." Elena stepped through the door and heard it close behind her. The room beyond was surprisingly simple for a crime lord. Dark walls, minimal furniture, and a large window that looked out at the stars. Lord Calthrax stood at the window with his back to her, his massive form outlined against the glow of distant nebulae. "Come closer," he said without turning around. Elena walked forward until she stood a few feet behind him, close enough to see the reflection of his golden eyes in the glass. "You are afraid of me," he said. And it was not a question. "Yes," Elena admitted, "because lying seemed pointless. Every species I encounter fears me," he continued. "The Velith fear my strength, and the Morthians fear my wealth. And even other Draconari fear my reputation." He turned to face her, and his eyes were calmer now, the fury from before replaced by something more thoughtful. "But you approached me anyway, and you delivered your warning, and you did not run when I called for you afterward." He tilted his head, studying her like a puzzle he wanted to solve. "Why?" Elena thought about the question carefully before answering. "Because letting you die would have been wrong," she said. "And because I have learned that running from danger does not make it go away. It just means you face it later when you are more tired." Calthrax made a sound that might have been a laugh, low and rumbling like distant thunder. "Your species is strange," he said. "You are small and soft and short-lived, and you have no natural weapons, and yet you spread across the galaxy like weeds that cannot be killed." He walked to a table and picked up a datapad, glancing at it briefly. "I and my people research you, Elena Vasquez, and I found an interesting history." He looked up at her. "You were born on New Valencia, a human colony that was destroyed in the Third Keth War, and you spent 6 years as a refugee before finding work on this ship." Elena nodded, unsure where this was going. "During those 6 years," Calthrax continued, "you survived 3 pirate attacks, 2 station riots, and an outbreak of Velith plague that killed half the passengers on your transport ship." He set down the datapad. "You have no military training, no combat skills, no special abilities, and yet you are still alive when so many others are dead. And that tells me something important about you." "What does it tell you?" Elena asked. "That you survive," he said simply. "That you watch and notice and adapt, and you find ways to keep living when everything is trying to kill you." He stepped closer, and Elena had to tilt her head back to look at his face. "I have soldiers who can fight," he said. "I have spies who can lie, and assassins who can kill. But I do not have someone who sees what I cannot see." His golden eyes locked onto hers. "Today, you noticed an assassin that passed through every security check on this ship. And you spotted a hidden weapon that my own instincts missed. And you found a way to warn me despite having no power and no voice." He paused. "I want you to work for me." Elena blinked. Certain she had misheard work for you? "As an observer," he said. "A watcher. Someone who stands at my side and notices the things the predators like me are blind." He gestured at the window and the stars beyond. "I have enemies everywhere, Elena Vasquez, and today proved that my security is not enough to stop them all. But you saw what they did not expect anyone to see." Elena's mind raced through the implications of his offer. Working for a crime lord meant leaving behind her simple life on the Gilded Nebula, trading safety for danger, and becoming part of a world she had always avoided. But what safety did she really have? She was a human in a galaxy that saw her as furniture, earning barely enough to survive. With no future beyond more years of serving wine to creatures who did not know her name, Lord Calthrax was offering her something different, a chance to be seen, to be valued, to use the skills she had developed. Through years of survival, it was terrifying, and it was dangerous, and it might get her killed, but it was also the first time in her life that someone powerful had looked at her and seen something worth wanting. What would I be called? She asked. Calthrax smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth that should have been terrifying, but somehow were not. "I have been thinking about that," he said. "In my language, we have a word for creatures that hunt by watching, by waiting, by seeing what others miss." He placed one massive claw on her shoulder. Surprisingly gentle. "You will be my shadow watcher, Elena Vasquez. And you will teach the galaxy that your species is not as weak as they believe." Elena looked up at the crime lord who had nearly been killed tonight, at the predator who had just admitted that a human could see things he could not. And she made her choice. "Yes," she said, "I will." 3 months later, Elena stood at Lord Calthrax's right hand during a summit of syndicate leaders from across the sector. They looked at her with confusion and contempt. This small human among giants. And she said nothing while they sneered. Then Calthrax spoke. "This is my shadow watcher," he said, his voice carrying across the room like thunder. "She sees what predators cannot. And if you cross me, she will know before you do." The sneers faded, replaced by something else. Uncertainty, doubt. And the first stirrings of fur. Elena smiled softly and kept watching. The galaxy was beginning to learn a lesson. It had forgotten humans were not weak. They were paying attention.